Hi, my name is Scarlett, and I'm an atheist and a skeptic, and today I am back looking at arguments for God. Not arguments from my cats looking for me to fill their bowl, although that is our everyday here. No, we're going to be looking at arguments for God, and we're especially looking at this guy, Peter Kreeft, who we've looked at before. And just as a reminder, this is a real live philosopher with a PhD from Fordham and who has taught at Boston College for many years. He's written a book on Christian apologetics, and the 20 arguments are actually posted on a website. Very handy for us. So there's the blibbity blab. Let's get into it. Just a little bit more blibbity blab before we get into today's argument. As you may have seen, I've changed up the way I'm doing the intros. I hope you enjoyed it. It's just something different to change it up a little bit. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Also, I decided to dig into the audio settings of the recording software I use, and I'm hoping that it's a little bit better this time. We'll see. I am trying to make improvements and making it a good user experience, as we like to say these days. All right, with that bit of blibbity blab out of the way, we are really getting into the argument. So, what does Peter Kreeft have for us today? Or what have I chosen for him to have for us? Well, this argument is called the common consent argument, and I haven't heard it before. This is a new one to me, although it's similar to other arguments we've seen. So, what does this argument say? So, Kreeft starts us out by saying, this proof is in some ways like the argument from religious experience, and in other ways like the argument from desire. Both of those basically state that people of all times have had religious experiences or they've had a desire for God, and so therefore there must be a God behind it, because where would they have gotten the idea? And in a way, this reminds me of the argument from the origin of God, or the ontological argument. Kind of, if I have an idea of this perfect being, it must exist. Or where would I have gotten the idea for a God if it didn't exist? Because we only come up with ideas for things that exist. All right, let's look at the argument, though, before we get too deep into what I'm imagining the similarities are. So number one, belief in God, that being to whom reverence and worship are properly due, is common to almost all people of every era. I want to stop on this first premise and push back a little bit, because my first question is, just one being? You're positing a being to whom reverence and worship are due, but what about polytheistic religions? There have been a lot of those throughout time. And the other thing I would ask is, you're assuming it's the same being. Has the being been defined the same? I'm thinking about the various kinds of polytheisms that existed. The Greek pantheon is one that I like to go to, because it is conceived of as very different from the way Christianity thinks of God. So while it's been true that God belief has been common in every era, what people have conceived of as the God has been different. It's almost as if the God or gods people have believed in have been constructed from their cultural point of view, like how they've imagined a God is based on the way their culture is at the moment. All right, but let's keep going. Let's go on to premise two. Either the vast majority of people have been wrong about this most profound element of their lives, or they have not. Okay, fine. That's great. Let's go on to number three. It is most plausible to believe they have not. I'm not sure why that's the most plausible here, and I would have big questions about that, like how did you decide that it's most plausible that people have been right about their God belief? It just boggles the mind that a philosopher would just throw this out there like that. It's just so plausible and obvious. But anyway, number four, therefore, it is most plausible to believe that God exists. So if we reduce this down to the most basic terms, people have usually believed in God, and it is implausible to think that they could be wrong about that God belief, so it's more plausible to believe that God exists. Got it. All right, let's look at the discussion, because the discussion is always more interesting, and we can go into a lot of the problems with these arguments. So for our discussion, we start out. Everyone admits that religious belief is widespread throughout human history. Yeah, sure. We have no problem with that. But the question arises, does this undisputed fact amount to evidence in favor of the truth of religious claims? Now, I would say no, but let's keep going. Even a skeptic will admit that the testimony we have is deeply impressive. I don't know that I would say it's impressive. Like, I don't see it as impressive, but I do admit people have tended to believe in God rather than not believe in God. Okay, fine. So, the vast majority of humans have believed in an ultimate being to whom the proper response could only be reverence and worship. I don't know about this ultimate being thing. I mean, I look at some of these polytheistic religions and there isn't like an ultimate being like the Christian monotheistic God. So I question this ultimate being. Like I said at the outset, different religions have come down differently on what God is, what worship is due this being, what the being has done. Going back to the Greek pantheon, Zeus was not a creator god. And actually, if you look at the way they conceived of the creation of the universe, it was more like things were born from other things. It really wasn't like a creation event like in Genesis. But anyway, okay, so I dispute this ultimate being. I think that it depends on the religion. Anyway, no one disputes the reality of our feelings of reverence, attitudes of worship, acts of adoration. Yeah, fine, I don't dispute that. But if God does not exist, then these things have never once had a real object. Yeah? Is it really plausible to believe that? And I would say, yeah, you think that there's a God there, you're worshiping something, that object is not real. Okay, but let's see where Kreeft takes us. The capacity for reverence and worship certainly seems to belong to us by nature, and it is hard to believe that this natural capacity can never, in the nature of things, be fulfilled, especially when so many testify that it has been. True enough, it is conceivable that this side of our nature is doomed to frustration. It is thinkable that those millions upon millions who claim to have found the Holy One who is worthy of reverence and worship were deluded. But is it likely? I really want to focus on this second to last sentence. Is it thinkable to those millions upon millions who claim to have found the Holy One who is worthy of reverence and worship were deluded? So again, we're talking about the Holy One, and it's capital H, capital O. I really feel like Kreeft is stuck in his Christian view of a deity and whatever conception he has of God. And then we get to this black and white thinking of either those millions of people were correct in their assessment of what they were feeling, worshiping, and all that, or they were deluded. And this clinical language, as if they have a mental impairment, that's the way I'm going to think of it. I feel like that's the wrong way to think about it. What if they're simply mistaken? Like they're having an experience, the feelings are real, but what they're attributing the cause of those feelings and experience to just doesn't exist. It's in their imagination. Now, Kreeft isn't very specific about what he means by the capacity for reverence and worship. What does that really mean? What is he talking about? What are these experiences? And of course, we can ask, have the experiences been the same across all religions, just any God belief? But he's not even specific about what it means for him. This is the kind of fuzzy language which allows people to put in whatever they think that means and assume that they have a shared experience when they actually don't. But one of the things I'm wondering about is this feeling that they have simply wonder and awe at our place in the universe? I know for myself, I get those feelings if I look up at the night sky. I find it amazing to think that we exist at all, that I feel so small, and yet my life is important to me. I feel the same feelings if I look at a sunrise, this connection to our world and this continuing movement that we have through space. I also can feel these things looking at art or reading a story. I can't tell you how many times I've read a book and had this deep feeling of connection and understanding and amazement at our lives and what we are doing here. Or maybe we can get this feeling just contemplating philosophical ideas. The long and short of it is, humans have this capacity for deep feeling, for a sense of awe at their place in the universe, and connection with other people and with people across time and space. The question is their understanding of what that means correct? And maybe it's not. I'm not sure if my understanding is correct. I know I have these experiences and these feelings, but maybe I don't know why. Well, enough said about that. Let's get back into the discussion. So Kreeft has just said that it is more plausible that God belief is real. So he keeps going with this. It seems far more likely that those who refuse to believe are the ones suffering from deprivation and delusion, like the tone-deaf person who denies the existence of music, or the frightened tenant who tells herself she doesn't hear cries of terror and distress coming from the street below, And when her children awaken to the sounds and ask her, "Why is that lady screaming, Mommy?" tells them, "Nobody's screaming, it's just the wind. That's all. Go back to sleep." So I guess it's atheists who are the delusional ones. I think that's what this paragraph is trying to say. We refuse to believe that there is the sound of God coming, and so we're the ones with the problem, even though, like, you haven't demonstrated that there is any God. But to be clear, tone-deaf people don't deny the existence of music. They just can't match pitch. It's not that they think music doesn't exist. And the frightened tenant who doesn't hear cries, I mean, we're talking about actual reality. We could go down in the street and check, and maybe she doesn't hear them. I don't know. But I think these are very strange comparisons for God belief. You're taking something that we can demonstrate, like we can demonstrate the existence of music. We could show that there is sound there, the waves are there, or we could see that there's somebody screaming. We could actually go outside and look. But God is not anywhere near any of this. And I have to say, it's important to understand that atheism is not unusual through time. There have been atheists all through time. There were Greek philosophers who were atheists, and not everybody has conceived of God the way Kreeft is thinking. But let's keep going in the discussion. Question 1. But the majority is not infallible. Most people were wrong about the movements of the sun and earth, so why not about the existence of God? It's not just the majority. Nobody is infallible. We're all capable of making mistakes. But I think this is, an interesting point. People were wrong about what they thought of the world, so why couldn't they be wrong about the existence of God, right? So the reply, if people were wrong about the theory of heliocentrism, they still experienced the sun and earth and motion. They were simply mistaken in thinking that the motion they perceived was the sun's. But if God does not exist, what is it that believers have been experiencing? The level of illusion goes far beyond any other example of collective error. It really amounts to collective psychosis. I don't know what it is with people who like to go to clinical language and act like if their pet belief is not true, then the only reason it's not true is that they have a psychological impairment. But going back just a line, if God does not exist, what is it that believers have been experiencing? Well, would you care to elaborate on what it is that believers have been experiencing? I know I keep asking the same question over and over again, but how do you know that what you have experienced is the same as what others have experienced? These are very vague terms. And I have to say that where we are right now is in the realm of psychology. Our brains are capable of imagining all kinds of fascinating and interesting things, a lot of which are not true. We're able to project a future that may or may not come to pass. We're able to rewrite the past. We can invent monsters and ghosts and all kinds of things that entertain us, but they don't belong to reality. Let's see where Kreeft goes. For believing in God is like having a relationship with a person. If God never existed, neither did this relationship. Yeah. That is true. You are imagining the relationship. You were responding with reverence and love to no one, and no one was there to receive and answer your response. It's as if you believe yourself happily married when in fact you live alone in a dingy apartment. And I don't think that that is a fair comparison at all, because you've never seen this deity. You just imagine the relationship. It's not a delusion. It doesn't have to be in the realm of psychological impairment. It's simply you have connected a feeling with something that isn't real. Let's keep going. Now, we grant that such mass delusion is conceivable. Again, it doesn't have to be a delusion, right? You're just wrong about the connection. Anyway, but what is the likely story? I mean, you'd have to do a study. You can't just sit in your office and philosophize about this, but I digress. If there were no other bits of experience which, taken together with our perceptions of the sun and earth, make it most likely that the earth goes round the sun, it would be foolish to interpret our experience that way. And this use of the word foolish, we as humans with our limited knowledge, we're doing the best we can and getting the best knowledge that we can. And I don't think it's a good idea to think that we're ever at a place where yes, we've got as much knowledge as we can get. Hopefully we keep learning as humans and there's always something to learn. And we should never take it for granted that there isn't something to learn. So I don't like this use of the word foolish, and I feel like that's guiding our interpretation. You're not foolish, you just have made a mistake. and you're not foolish to make a mistake. That's part of being human. Anyway, back to the text. How much more so here when what we experience is a relationship involving reverence and worship and sometimes love. Yet you don't know that that relationship is real. You're imagining it. It is most reasonable to believe that God really is there. Why? Why is it most reasonable? Given such widespread belief in him. Okay, so we're just going to do an argumentum ad populum. Lots of people have believed it, so it must be true, right? Unless atheists can come up with a very persuasive explanation for religious belief, one that takes full account of the experience of believers and shows their experience is best explained as delusion and not insight, but atheists have never done so. Unless atheists can come up with a very persuasive explanation for religious belief, like way to reverse the burden of proof on us, Kreeft. Like we're the ones that have to explain your experience. You're not the one that actually has to make the connection for us. Find the evidence that shows your worship or whatever, your feeling of reverence connects to a real being. No, we're the ones that have to explain it for you. Good job. And I have to say this, return again and again to the notion of this is either a delusion or you have insight. Either it's true or you have a mental impairment. Again, we have this binary choice. There are lots of other things, including you may just be wrong. You're having an experience, but it's just not connecting to a real object. But no, Kreeft is all up in his feels. His feelings are correct unless you can prove otherwise. Let's move on to question 2. But isn't there a very plausible psychological account of religious belief? Many non-believers hold that belief in God is the result of childhood fears, that God is in fact a projection of our human fathers, someone up there who can protect us from natural forces we consider hostile. So, is it true that many non-believers hold that belief in God is the result of childhood fears? I'm not sure I hear that. I mainly hear that belief in God is the result of indoctrination. Maybe this is more that people think that God belief started from fears about the universe, being afraid of things, not understanding them, and wanting to explain them through a God, but also appealing to a God to help them assuage those fears. I don't know. I tend to think of God belief as coming from this idea that we ascribe agency to things that have no agency, that we think that natural processes are the result of a deity. So we're used to looking for evidence that people came through and did stuff, and when we see natural processes, we think some bigger person did that thing, and there's just not a person there. So this is basically just being wrong about agency, that there's not an agency behind all the natural processes. All right, let's see what the answer is. So we have a reply A. This is not really a naturalistic explanation of religious belief. It is no more than a statement dressed up in psychological jargon that religious belief is false. You begin from the assumption that God does not exist, then you figure that since the closest earthly symbol for the Creator is a father, God must be a cosmic projection of our human fathers. But apart from the assumption of atheism, there is no compelling evidence at all that God is a mere projection. Well, not all religions assume that God is sort of like a father figure. Christianity certainly does, and once again, I think Kreeft is trapped in his thinking about Christianity, or monotheism at least. But I love this last sentence. Apart from the assumption of atheism, there is no compelling evidence at all that God is a mere projection. So once again, way to reverse the burden of proof. It's up to atheists to show that God is a projection. It's not up to you to demonstrate that your God exists. But, I don't see any evidence of a real being we call God. I don't know why, if I don't see evidence of a God, I need to prove to you that you're seeing a projection. But let's keep going. In fact, the argument begs the question. We seek psychological explanation only for ideas we already know are presumed to be false, not those we think to be true. We ask, why do you think black dogs are out to kill you? Were you frightened by one when you were small? But we never ask, why do you think black dogs aren't out to kill you? Did you have a nice black puppy once? And this is a very puzzling paragraph to me. We don't, in fact, only seek psychological explanations for ideas we know are presumed to be false. So he's thinking again of this notion of delusion, that we need to show that they are deluded. But psychology does study very real things. Like it studies depression and anxiety and problematic relationships and why are you having issues with people. It studies very real things. So I think Kreeft is stuck in an old version of psychology that does not really correspond to how psychology actually operates. Just in short, psychology is not only about things like people who are deluded or who are seeing hallucinations or who have a psychotic break or anything like that. There are lots of very real phenomena that psychology studies. Whether you accept some of their studies or not, it's trying to study real things. Let's keep going. Reply B. Though there must be something of God that is reflected in human fathers, otherwise our symbolism for him would be inexplicable, Christians realize that the symbolism is ultimately inadequate. Oh, so we do have an acknowledgement that we're thinking mainly of Christians here, and we're not just thinking about all religions. But yeah, Christians definitely like to think of God the Father and Jesus the Son and all that kind of stuff. Okay. And if the ultimate being, inexplicably capitalized again, UB, the ultimate being is mysterious in a way that transcends all symbolism, how can he be a mere projection of what the symbol represents? I don't know. You're the one that's imagining he exists. So, you could try to explain this a little bit better, I guess. I'm not quite sure why I'm sitting here answering your questions at this point. The truth seems to be, and if God exists, the truth is the other way around. Our earthly fathers are pale projections of the heavenly Father. Oh my. Okay. It's not that we have fathers and then we imagine this bigger being that is the ultimate being. And because we have fathers, we imagine him, because it's always a him, as a father. No, it's that he exists and he's given us these earthly fathers. Yeah, sure, Jan. It should be noted that several writers, example Paul Vitz, have analyzed atheism as itself a psychic pathology, an alienation from the human father that results in rejection of God. And I don't even know what you do with a sentence like this, that atheism is the psychic pathology, an alienation. And the real projection is on Kreeft's part. This is a real you. He imagines that either he is correct in his assessment that there is a God and that this is like a fatherly God, or he's deluded. So he has projected this delusion onto atheists. Yeah, so maybe we're the ones that suck. Did you ever think of that? Maybe it's the heathens that are actually the deluded ones, and Christians are actually the sane ones because reasons. So this common consent argument, not great, I think. It suffers from several flaws. The first, I think, is a simple black and white thinking that either Christians are absolutely justified in connecting their feelings of reverence to an actual deity and not attributing it to the fact that they were indoctrinated and from childhood taught that this deity exists, and so they just assume it's true, but it's not there. They either are absolutely correct or they're deluded. And I don't think that it is correct to think that you're deluded if you've been taught your whole life that a deity exists, so you're connecting these feelings to that deity. I don't think that this rises to the kind of psychological impairment that is implied by the words. There's also a great shifting of the burden of proof here. So after the black and white thinking, Kreeft wants the atheist to show the error of the Christian ways. Let's be real, these are Christian ideas. It's up to the atheist to show that there is no God, as opposed to the Christian in this case to demonstrate that the feelings are connected to a real being, that there is a real relationship. And then, of course, at the end, we have a whole lot of nuh-uh-you. It's actually the atheists that are deluded. They're the ones that have daddy issues or whatever it is that he's trying to insinuate at the end of this particular argument. And so I guess at the end of the day, this is just an argument that, people have believed in God, and it'd be crazy to think that there's no God there, right? Maybe you saw some other problems with the argument from common consent, and I'd be happy to hear what you have to say, so put it in the comments below. I love to read your comments. And while you're down there, like, subscribe, all the YouTube stuffing. Pour out your libations to Algorithmo and his consort Algorithma, who we know absolutely and for sure are real and have a real relationship with us, and we're not deluded at all in our thoughts about Algorithma and Algorithmo. And if you like what I do, you can also buy me a coffee. Here are my cute kitties begging for kibble. That's what they do best. There's one begging behind me right now. And thank you, thank you, thank you to all the people who've bought me a coffee. It is greatly appreciated. And I don't know what's next, but you know it's going to be stupid. Bye for now.